What is the meaning of succession planning? Now, this is something that's bantered around a lot by the lawyers. They'll talk about it. And for a lot of lawyers, it means something equivalent to estate planning, just figuring out where assets go in the event of a death. Now, I take a much broader view of this and put a bigger meaning on succession planning. What I'm really talking about is how does that business continue on in time? Who succeeds to the leadership? Who succeeds to the ownership of that business to really keep it going as an enterprise? It's really a different view. You can view a business as being an asset, and many times stock, membership interest, ownerships of a business. It is a valuable asset, right? It's an important thing in estate planning. But for me, it's a really different thing. The business is an enterprise. I like to think of a business as being separate from its business owner and having an ongoing life and existence. I think that's how you often get the most value for a business, is to really view it as independent and to really make it to where it has a separate existence from its owner. Now, certainly under the legal system, we kind of have this legal fiction splitting the business owner and the business, right? Where the two will not meet. And if you're really complying with the legal requirements for business entities for separation of assets and the like, that really is where you end up at, right? The business is supposed to have assets over here. The owner is supposed to have assets over there. They shouldn't be commingled through a bank account. When stuff does flow between the owner and the business, there should be a degree of formality before it, right? In these instances where the owner is putting money into the business, maybe buying stock, capitalizing the company, making a contribution to help the business grow, that needs to be documented coming in as being equity. And on the other side, when the business is making profits and passing money out, the money needs to go back to everybody in a formal way, particularly with respect to the owner. If the owner is working in the business, particularly in something like an S Corp, they're going to get a paycheck, or they might get a distribution from the business. But that all needs to be formally documented, right? These two are not intermingling, right? An owner doesn't get paid or take profits out of a business typically by running it up on his credit card, on the business credit card. That money comes out through a check, through a distribution, through a wire transfer, through whatever form. It goes from the business to the owner, documented as a distribution. And then the owner is going to put that money into their bank account generally and then use it for expenses, right? These two are staying very separated. And that's good for liability protection. It's good for having that firewall. But it's also good for succession planning, because what we want to do is be able to have that enterprise have value separate from the owner. And so that firewall really helps. And sometimes something bad happens in the business, and that firewall protects the personal assets of the owner. So if the business goes bankrupt, the owner may still have assets in their personal capacity. Maybe something bad happens in the person's personal capacity, but they still have the business that could potentially later pay them distributions, pay them salary, etc. Right? So these two need to be separated from a legal standpoint in most cases. And then we want to think about how do we keep that business rolling, and how do we keep that value in there for whoever's next, right? For the spouse, for the children, for loved ones, for charity, whatever the case may be. We want to protect all of that value that's sitting in the business to make sure that we're giving the maximum amount and continuing the most on. The owner does better if that business keeps rolling, particularly if they go through a period of disability or retirement and they want to make money from it. That business needs to be strong and hopefully cash flowing, and maybe even making distributions out, certainly hopefully increasing in value. So we want that business to exist separately. And then if something happens to the owner, if the owner passes away and goes into the estate plan, then where does that money flow, right? If we're getting into that situation where the owner passes on, now we got to think about who takes over ownership of the business. And ownership, control, and management don't necessarily have to be the same in a succession plan, right? It's very possible for us to separate those two out. We could set up a situation where maybe a trusted employee, a manager of the business, comes in and actually runs all the business and the day-to-day affairs, and they keep things trucking for the business. Meanwhile, the owner can either step away or kind of maybe get phase into a retirement. I've seen people do this. Somebody new takes over the business and it phases into retirement. Or it could be the same. There will be situations where maybe an owner wants to hand the business over to a child, an adult child that's going to run the business, right? And they say, you are the one that's chosen. I want you to run this business. And they may or may not align ownership at that point. It's possible if a person owns a business and has multiple children, they may want to divide that business ownership over multiple children where each takes a third, let's say. Or they might want to say, I'm going to give the business to the child who's going to run the business, and the other children are going to get perhaps different assets in the estate distribution, right? So maybe they get a house or a property or something that they want, and the child that's going to run the business gets the business. Now, this can be hard in the real world because of the relative values. They may not align as well. But the point is, there's a lot of flexibility. And when I'm thinking about succession planning personally, when I'm working with my clients, what I'm thinking about is keeping that business running, making that business more and more valuable if possible. Meanwhile, thinking about how do we keep the lights on, how do we keep the business managed, but then we're also thinking about the ownership and who does that go to and what do we want that to look like. And again, this is one of those situations where sky is the limit. We get to decide how we want that to look within certain very reasonable limits. Under state law, when we do a proper estate plan, we have the choice about how we want to direct those assets in the estate planning context, right? So we can say, hey, we want it to go to a spouse. We want it to go to children. Maybe we want to go to a trust to be held for a while. Maybe we want to get the business sold before or after, the point where somebody dies, right? It's possible to say, hey, we know that the owner is getting, older or more sickly, or maybe the children just don't want to take over the business, right? These are all very likely case scenarios. And what we can do in those situations is say, hey, we want this business to move to somebody else. And we can start mapping that out very early in the process, right? We can pick and choose who we want the business to go to. And if we want to sell the business, we can sell the business out and divide the proceeds in the way that's necessary. We can either take the money into the estate and have it in a bank account, have it held, have it ready for distribution should the person pass, or we may make lifetime gifts, right? We may say, hey, the person who owns the business, maybe they're at the age where they don't need as many assets and they want to get that out to their family sooner than later. A lot of options here in the planning scenario, right? So we get to talk through and think about it. But the key is we need to be looking downstream, both for the business and for the owner. And we probably want to look at those two separately. Right? What is the long-term stream of the business? What keeps that business running smoothly? What makes it a valuable asset for the owner and their ongoing generations, or whoever else they want to benefit, maybe it's a charity? And then what does the owner want, and how do they want things to look? And sometimes what you don't want to do is pass the business to the next generation, right? Maybe that next generation doesn't want it. A lot of children these days, adult children, just don't want to take over their parents' business. Maybe they've seen the parents working too hard. A lot of times, by the time the parents are the age where they want to give the business up, the children are older. They've started careers. They're engaged in other things. They're just too busy to be coming back into the business, right? So there's a lot of variables here. How we stack these variables, how we make them work, really custom, right? Really about you and the plan. So that gives you a really different meaning and idea of succession planning. I think it's more than just saying, hey, we got some stock certificates or some LLC interests laying around. Let's get them to the family. We really want to think about keeping that business valuable, maximizing the wealth for the family, and really pushing things along into the future. All right, folks, if you have questions or comments, I often welcome them, although I like to make the statement here on the channel that they will not be confidential. So don't put anything in the questions or comments that are things that you don't want other people seeing, right? So nothing really private, nothing about your business. Nothing like, hey, I'm going to be selling my business soon or whatever the case may be. Keep it very generic. If you have generic questions about business law, stuff that you can anonymize or whatever, feel free to drop it below. I do look at the comments. Sometimes I'll do videos on this or my other channel based on what I'm seeing from people. So drop those comments. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you get value from it. If you do subscribe, send me a note. Let me know. Put a comment down. Say, hey, I'm a new subscriber. And then whether you're a new subscriber or not, love your suggestions for future videos and topics. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in today. Looking forward to seeing you for another video soon, and hope to see you in the comments.